to see how far we get in the life and times of William Smith. And other people that we'll be talking about in coming weeks will be Darwin, Mary Anning, Geological Society of London. We'll talk about the Ordovician controversy, or the Silurian-Cambrian controversy with Murchison and Sedgwick, and a variety of other things. So also have a lecture on the geological history of the British Isles. So if there are any of these topics that you feel keenly about and want to do the lecture or contribute in any way, please feel free to volunteer to do that.
We should talk.
Okay. All right, so William Strata Smith, as he was known, born 1769, 1839. Some of you have perhaps read the book, The Map That Changed the World, by, what's his name? That's sort of a popularized version, and he gets quite flowery in there. He has a section called the Jurassic Interlude, and then reminisces about his own childhood in England and so on. Then he comes back to his senses and goes on with the rest of it. But in addition to that, there's a book that's published or written by John Morton called Strata, How William Smith's First Map of the Earth in 1801 Inspired the Science of Geology. William Smith had an orphaned nephew by the name of John Phillips, who became a geologist in his own right, became Sir John Phillips. If you're familiar with the term Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic, he's the one that coined those terms. So he followed in his uncle's footsteps, became a well-known geologist. This is the memoirs of William Smith, author of the map of Strait of England and Wales by his nephew and pupil John Phillips, FRS, Fellow of the Royal Society, first published in 1844. So these don't have all the flowery jargon, but go through and some in his words and some of the details. So here's an image of William Smith later in life, and we'll just proceed, go through a little bit of his biography and why he's famous, some of the sites that we'll see. So let's put William Smith in context first. So at the time that he was doing his seminal work, and much of actually the legwork, there were few roads, but it was a time of great sailing ships. Those were the way people get around the world. This was at a time where the Industrial Revolution was first getting underway. Coal, of course, was the source of fuel for the Industrial Revolution. And it was a great source of wealth, so landowners were very, very curious about whether they had resources, coal particularly, or other resources on their properties. So someone who could tell them that in a reasonable amount of time for a reasonable amount of money would be very valuable. At the time, there was no geological time scale that we're familiar with, no concept of Cambrian, Cretaceous, anything. Carboniferous was perhaps the closest to a real name, geological name at the time. General belief that rocks and fossils were a result of Noah's flood. There was no science of geology, no science of stratigraphy. Paleontology was just getting on its feet. This was a time, was the age of the Enclosure Acts in British history. And this is, the result of that was that instead of people just willy-nilly farming property, they started to parcel out land, and people were assigned to farm certain areas. So then they could do things like crop rotation and worry about fertilizer and keeping the soil properly fed so that they could continue to grow things. So surveying was at a premium because for the first time in British history, people were out going and again parsing out the land and drawing corners. It was during this time that the lovely countryside that we see when we drive through England really came into existence. Hedgerows were going up to define these newly surveyed lots and plots. Stone walls were going up to delineate them as well. So the beautiful countryside that we'll see really is a function of the Enclosure Act in the late 1700s. There was also at the time a huge gap between the privileged and the working poor, both economically and in terms of the way they were valued in society and the opportunities that would come to them. So this was the time into which William Smith was born, and by the end of his 70-year life, he had contributed greatly to many of the domains of geology of which we are practitioners today. Lithostratigraphy, he was the first there. He defined the law of faunal succession, produced the first geological maps, mapped the entire country of Britain. What we would call mining geology, he was at the vanguard of that. Engineering geology in terms of his work on canals and coastlines. Hydrogeology, in 1805 he got the Society of Arts Medal for a treatise that he wrote on irrigation and draining. His work was instrumental in putting together the geological timescale, and the concept of faunal succession was key, or a key part of people coming to terms with transmutation or biological evolution. So what an exciting time to be doing geology or be doing research. So the main things that we will have time to talk about will be his development of the concept of lithostratigraphy, faunal succession, and then the map. This is the amount of time and the amount of miles that he traveled doing agricultural work, draining farms and draining meadows, draining fields, could be a totally separate lecture and separate field trip. But we'll focus on these because that's what he's really best known for. So here is a digital elevation model of the south of England, Devonshire down here, Wales, and we can see a number of landforms in there. And the landforms from here to the lower right are really represented or defined by differential erosion of gently dipping Mesozoic strata, generally dipping back towards London to the southeast, but also with some gentle folds and anticlines. So let's skip that. So here are some of the places that we'll visit on the field trip. Spend some time in London and chase William Smith there. Most of the stuff we look at will be around Bath, where he did his seminal work. We'll also take a quick stop at Stow-on-the-Wold, and we won't get over to Churchill. It's only about 10 miles from Stow. This is in this line of hills here. This hogback is developed on the Jurassic Oolite, and it's called the Wold, or the Cotswold Hills. So Stow-on-the-Wold refers to the name of the town Stow in that particular position. So in 1769, William Smith was born to John Smith in Churchill, and I think we mentioned before that his father died when he was a fairly young boy. His mother remarried, and he really became the steward, or he became not the property, but the person that took responsibility for him was his uncle. And his uncle owned a farm there, and so he worked on his uncle's farm and was expected to put in a lot of hours, but he also expected him to get an education. So he did go to school and he paid attention. And at one point in his young life, he asked his uncle for a book for his birthday present when he was 16 years old, and the book was a book about surveying, which kind of surprised his uncle. It's like, why do you want to waste money on a book about surveying? But William Smith got his wish, and he read the book, and we'll see here it led directly to the opportunities that went on to make him famous. So as he worked in the fields around Churchill, he noticed that there were fossils weathering out. And among the fossils that were weathering out were little round lamp shells that we call terebrachyid brachiopods. So they're articulate brachiopods. They were referred to by the kids there as pundips, and they would use them like they did marbles. Okay? So they'd play these games with them. The other fossils that he saw in profusion were what the butter maids called poundstones. And these were sea urchins. And so as he looked at those, I mean, it was clear to him that that's exactly what they were. But he was curious about fossils from his experience as a kid and the things that he just found kicking around in the countryside there. So, as fate would have it, when he was 17 years old, Edward Webb from Stowe was asked to come over to Churchill and to do some surveying as the Enclosure Act proceeded. And William Smith watched him work, and then having read a book and taught himself surveying, he went up to Edward Webb and followed him around and sort of insinuated himself into his daily activities. And Edward Webb was very impressed by this teenage kid. And so he took him around, he put him off on jobs, and he did very, very well at surveying. So he asked permission if he could then take young William back to his home in Stow-on-the-Wold. So this is the office and the home of Edward Webb and his family. So this is where he had his consulting surveying business housed out of. And William Smith lived there with him for a few years as he continued his apprenticeship as a surveyor.
And just FYI, George Washington was a prominent surveyor in Virginia and areas to the west, and that was his main profession at the same time.
Really? Okay.
So the father of our country got his start in surveying.
Awesome. That's good to know. It just so happened that a few years on, Lady Jones of Ramsbury inherited some properties near Bath. And she wanted Edward Webb to come down and survey her new properties. She knew that she had coal on the properties, so she wanted someone to come down and survey and figure out what she was worth and how much the land was worth. And by this time, Edward Webb trusted William Smith so much that he sent him on his way down there to handle that. So in true geologist fashion, William Smith didn't want to spend the money for a coach, so he walked the 60 miles over a period of 2 days. Shows up down here southwest of Bath, knocks on the door of Lady Jones's home. She greets him, and
carrying like surveying equipment on his shoulder the whole way?
yeah, carrying a little bit of stuff, yeah, stuff they needed.
Not a theology light or anything like that?
I'm not sure what all the stuff he had with him, but
He just used the GPS in his phone.
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, don't you have that app? So here is the area then where William Smith cut his teeth professionally and saw patterns and things that, well, people had seen it before, but just not, they weren't thinking about it the same way he was. So let's just become a little bit familiar with this area. First of all, here is the major city of Bath, which was England's second city after London for a period of time. And it is a large and to this day beautiful city, as you'll see when we get there. This is the area around High Littleton where Lady Jones had her property. Adjacent to this area are two brooks, the Cam Brook that runs through Dunkerton and Coombe Hay and up to Midford, and that's paralleled by Wellow Brook that joins with Cam Brook at Midford, then continues along to the Avon-Kennet Canal. From about here over, Mesozoic rocks occur at the surface. From about this point to the west, deformed carboniferous rocks are exposed at the surface. So if we zoom in just on the area that's in the outline box there,
Can I ask a question?
yeah,
Does that mean there's a whole bunch of strata missing or something?
yes, yeah. There's an unconformity there that is pretty critical. So here's the line of demarcation. Here, in other words, here's the feather erosional edge of the Mesozoics, angularly unconformably overlying the deformed Paleozoics over here. Each of these red stars represents a coal pit or a colliery that people were working. And just here, a little bit to the east of High Littleton, on Lady Jones's property, was this 3-story stone building that one other occupant was renting, but she allowed William Smith to live there during his time of service. So here is the famous Rugborn Farm, and on the little lane that goes past Rugborn, up points to the long driveway that goes up to the home. There's this little sign, sometimes overgrown with brush, but it says, "To Rugborn Farmer William Smith, father of English Geology Lodge from 1792 to 95. So employed there for 3 years, and his main task was to study the coal mines. This house used to be surrounded by a wall at the time William Smith lived there. There's still a small stone wall with an entry door in it. This home was purchased a few years ago, and we were really pleased to recognize that the owners understood the historical significance to geologists of this home. So they are refurbishing it, they're bringing it up to the computer age, and so it has decent plumbing and internet and all that stuff. But they allowed a few of us to come in 2013. Inside. And the floors, that they've tried to maintain it as close to the original as they could. So they haven't gone in completely gutted it, and they didn't have Chip and Joanne Gaines come in and do their thing. So it's pretty cool. I'll get in touch with them ahead of time just to make sure that they don't mind a group of 50 people coming up their driveway and stomping on their daffodils and all that stuff. But the 2 times I've been there, they've been very gracious. Allow us to.
So what would William Smith do to
Or
look
3
for
times.
coal?
What?
Imagine everything's covered with surface, so how would he look for coal?
Yeah, good question. Let's get into that.
Are the upper windows bricked off?
They are.
Okay.
Yeah, tax things.
Yeah.
So here's Rugborn Farm. He would exit the building, get on his trusty horse, and go about a mile north to the Mearns Colliery. So coal beds would come to the surface, and then, so people could see that they were there, and then they would try to determine the breadth and width and depth of them. Initially, the coal pits were just worked at the surface because groundwater would come in, or there'd be noxious gases, and so it wasn't safe. But then as technology and the steam engine were developed, they were able to get winches and lower people down so they could mine as deep as maybe 500,000 feet. But these are somewhat contorted straight, at least tipped on in, so the coal seam at the surface, they go deeper and deeper, and there are some faults and offsets. So it's a little bit complex.
How thick were the seams?
They ranged anywhere from a few inches to several feet.
500,000 feet?
500 to 8,000
The
feet.
2 was really, really subtle.
Yeah, sorry. Well, I was just trying to impress you. How amazing it is.
Way
Yeah.
down there.
Just think the geothermal gradient, how warm it made. So here's 1890. Here are some folks working the coal. Here's a little railroad track that they would use to bring the coal in buckets to the canal so they could then take it to market.
How are they gonna get through that?
So among the papers that William Smith may have come across was a cross-section drawn in 1716 by a fellow named John Strachey in the area of the Mearns Colliery where he was working. And so a couple things here shows that Strachey was pretty observant. And this gives us the starting point for William Smith. So what Strachey noticed was that the strata at the surface was essentially horizontal. And there were reddish, yellowish earths, and then the lias, blue lias on top of that. But beneath that, the rocks were deformed. And here are the Carboniferous rocks, and here are some of the, so what do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 or 11 coal seams that John Strachey knew about. And so he plotted these on a correlation chart. And so you can see the angular unconformity between them. And then you can see that each of these coals varies in thickness. Sometimes there's splits in between, sometimes they're really thin. And so these coal seams were given some sort of weird names, like the Kingswood Toad, well, some of them were just descriptive, like the 10-inch. Here's the Stinking Fen, the Cathead Keen, the 3-coal Keen. So they.
Stinking fan is methane, or?
What?
Stinking fan
For
is
sulfur.
methane off it, or were they gassy coals?
No, not that nobody's recorded that. So they were just worried about stuff they could burn. So William Smith learned a lot from the miners who had worked, many of them, for decades and were very familiar with the underground. So William Smith went to the Mearns Colliery, was lowered down several hundred feet, and he took very careful notes on what he saw. And so at first he's talking about blue limestones, horizontal, then red beds, horizontal. Then all of a sudden beneath that, the rocks took on a different character, were tilted, deformed, faulted. And he characterized each one of these coals, and what he found was that not only did the coals occur in the same order throughout the area, which shouldn't surprise any of us, but he also noted that the coals were occurring in what we would currently call cyclothems or depositional sequences. They started out with a non-marine underclay, went to the coal, then they marine shales, marine limestones, and then non-marine sands coming back up to the next coal. And that order of non-marine to non-marine was repeated over and over and over, no matter which coal was in there. So he, for the first time, saw that there was an order on a small scale to the stratigraphy that you could see from coal seam to coal seam to coal seam on order of tens or 20 feet. So some people like to detract from William Smith's remarkable record and remarkable discoveries because, John Strachey had seen this before and maybe he wasn't given enough credit, although William Smith was never shy about giving him credit.
Is that some kind of dike that's supposed to be in the center? Or?
Yeah, what does that say? A ridge which breaks, and anyway, it's probably some faulted interval. Yeah, looks like a fault. So in red, there's the angular unconformity. And here's another drawing that shows the coal. Let's see, a ridge of rubble breaking the course of veins and making them trap up or down. So yeah, fault, some offset. So William Smith saw there was a pattern, repeatable pattern in the coal measures. He also saw the angular unconformity, and rocks above the coal measures were dipping gently to the southeast. So in his mind, he started to wonder if rocks continued to dip to the southeast all the way to London, and maybe across the channel to Paris, and maybe, who knows how far. But here's sort of the greatness of William Smith. He saw a pattern in a relatively small, to that point, geologically insignificant area, except that it had coal and people were interested in that. But he saw a pattern in the coal measures, in the cycles. He saw a pattern in the rocks above it, and he wondered, how far can I take what I'm seeing here? How far can I extrapolate that around the world, right? So I don't want to say he's like Isaac Newton, but Isaac Newton took 3 laws of motion and said, if these are real, we can apply these little things we just discovered. This should extend all the way across the universe. So that's pretty cool. If you can make a small discovery that applies over the biggest possible swatch, that's what good scientists do. So we'll talk about him later, but James Hutton, he took classes from a professor who was a graduate student of Sir Isaac Newton's. So wouldn't that be cool to take classes from someone who was one generation, sat at the feet of Sir Isaac Newton? And what did James Hutton do? He said these physical laws that Hutton's been telling us apply through space, they also apply through time, and that's uniformitarianism. And that's what made him great, was because, and then Siccar Point, we'll talk about the significance of that later. But here what we see is this relatively uneducated, lower class, orphan child who reads a book on surveying, makes himself useful. When he does get an opportunity to use his skills, he pays attention and he sees some patterns and he goes, I wonder, how far can we take what I'm seeing here and apply it? So because he was so astute and made a reputation for himself, when it came time to finally market this coal or make it marketable, he was in another sort of prime position to make his next big discovery and move forward. The cost, the thing that determined the cost of coal out of a coal pit was not so much the labor to prize it out, because that was cheap. Just get these young kids, throw them down there, give them a penny a day or whatever, make them work 20 hours a day, and you get coal. The expensive part was getting it from the coal pit to end user. And if you had to do it with a horse and a buggy, that was extremely expensive. So England was going through a canal craze. Canals were being built everywhere. So the colliers, the landowners in Somersetshire, went to the capital and said, we need a canal. And so there was the Somerset Coal Canal Act was passed, and in the late 1790s, and William Smith was asked to be the principal surveyor and eventual engineer for the coal canal. So instead of going to the Mearns Colliery, he then would come out of Rugbourne and follow the navvies as they dug a canal that extended from High Littleton all the way up to Midford and up to Monkton Combe and up to the Dundas Aqueduct. He also knew that there was money set aside to dig a parallel canal along Wellowbrook, so Cambrook and Wellowbrook. So knowing that he was going to have to do this twice, that incentivized him to pay attention to what he was seeing as they opened up the countryside and dug the canal. Because he knew he was going to repeat it, and if there were stretches where water... It's tempting to think of a canal as a river, but a canal is a long defile that has standing water in it. And it's only useful if the water stays in it. So if they were crossing porous sandstones or oolite, water would leak out, so you would have to do something. Or if you got into some harder type of rock, it might take more effort to dig through it. So from a practical point of view, to be able to predict how long and what they would encounter as they dug the second one, he paid a lot of detail to what he was seeing. So his idea was that the rocks were dipping gently to the southeast that he saw in the Mears Colliery, and he was able to test that model as more and more and more strata were being excavated. And sure enough, what he saw was that the strata that were present in the western side fell away and beneath the ground to the east, and younger strata appeared. Then those would fall away, tilting back to the southeast, and the next package of strata would appear. So as he looked at those strata, because he was interested in fossils as a kid, he also paid attention to the fossils. Now, as this was going on, the person that hired him was a bridge builder by the name of John Rennie. He had gotten the call from Parliament to head up this coal act, or the coal digging. And then he subcontracted William Smith to do the hands-on day-to-day work. As they were getting prepped to do this, William Smith was sent on a long journey from Bath all the way up to York and then back around. On the way back, they took a little bit more of a westerly path. And after a few months, he ended up back in Bath. This trip was seminal. It was critical. He went with two other gentlemen who were interested in how to build locks and tunnels and things. William Smith, instead of sitting in the comfort of the coach, sat up with the driver and was always looking and making notes. And he'd ask to stop, jump down with his hammer, break off rocks, make notes, get excited about things, where the other travelers were just, let's get to the hotel and get some sleep or a meal. And no, but he was, no, we got to stop here and got to stop there. So he was able then to learn a lot about the stratigraphy of this area and confirm a lot of the things that he had seen earlier. And there's sort of an apocryphal story that when they got to York, he got up on the high tower of York Minster and looked out across the countryside, and he could see the chalk plains, he could see the oolite, he could see the clay vales, the strike valleys between them, and he felt totally comfortable. He felt like he was just back around the area of Bath because he saw very familiar strata with very familiar landforms in the same type of setting. He tried to share that with the folks he was with. They just, who cares? So
you think the idea of making a map came to him at that point when he noticed there was some system to it, and that maybe the details of how to create it were still lost on him?
yes, exactly. And I think also, if you can find strata in one canal cut and predict it's in the next, then it must be in between. And if it is, then you should be able to trace where that should be found, even if it's covered. So talk about the Enclosure Act. Isn't that beautiful? So here are some of the areas that were enclosed by hedgerows and stone walls. This is the valley of Cam Brook. So this is where the first canal was dug. So poor William Smith had to leave that nice stone house in the morning, get on his horse, and spend his day in that beautiful place. Here's the town of, so here we're looking to the east along the path of the canal, which is now gone, through the beautiful little village of Dunkerton.
They were paying him to survey the flat canal.
They were, right, they were paying him to survey the most efficient way to get that flat spot across there. So unfortunately, most of the canal is now gone. Trains became more efficient than canal boats, so they filled in the canal because they already had a flat spot that they could put the train tracks on. And this train stopped running, I can't remember.
50s, early 60s.
In the 50s, 60s. There's a movie called The Titfield Thunderbolt the black and white movie that talks about, takes place in this area, and the people who want the train to stay take a bet with somebody who's trying to get stuff to market more rapidly, and so they have this contest to see who win, and I'll leave it to you to watch the movie to see who wins the race. But trains were a big obsession too. So the canal turned into train tracks, and now it's all overgrown.
There's still a train there?
No,
Trains-
train's gone.
Train's gone too now?
Train's gone. So, William Smith paid close attention to the succession of strata. He also noticed that many of the strata had fossils that were unique to them. So this was critical, because if he was going to go across the countryside to Willowbrook and he saw a sandstone sticking out or a limestone, it could be one of any number of limestones, but if it had the key fossils in it, then he knew exactly which limestone he was looking at and what should be above and below it. There were two local, fairly wealthy people by the name of Benjamin Richardson and Richard Townsend, who were both clergymen, and they were well-heeled. They lived in the town of Bath, and they heard about that William Smith was interested in fossils. They were extremely interested in fossils, so they would meet from time to time and trade fossils or trade specimens or see what the other ones had found. And let me come back. Okay, I'll come back to that story. In 1795, William Smith decided that it would be more efficient for him if he lived in Bath. So he moved from Rugbourne Farm, moved onto the southwest outskirts of the city of Bath, actually on a terrace overlooking the beautiful city, and there he rented apartments, this particular apartment, in what's called Cottage Crescent. So it's a crescent-shaped apartment building with maybe four units in it. And this is the one that he rented, made of the Jurassic oolite. And then in 1798, he decided to buy his own property. And so he took out a loan from the Duke of Midford Castle to purchase this oolite stone house that is called the Tucking Mill Cottage. And he lived there or he owned it anyway, from 1798 to 1818, or 1798 to 1818. If we turn around, and literally a stone's throw is where the trace of the canal would have been. So this was right along,
Literally, you're standing on it, taking
Cambrook.
that picture.
yeah, standing basically on the old canal, take that picture.
How long did it take them to build the canal then? Long time?
Yeah, it took him 4 or 5 years to get it done. So it didn't take till 1818, but he decided that, I think one of the things he had in mind was by buying this property that he could exploit the canal. And the owners of the canal actually felt like maybe he was trying to cash in on his work, so they dismissed him from his job in 1798. But he had a plan. Up on the hills above the cottage were outcrops of the inferior oolite. And the oolite was being quarried and sent out as building stone. So he took out a loan, hired some workers, and built a narrow gauge railway up behind the house, up to the top of the hill where the quarry was. Just about that time, there was a downturn in the economy, and as it turned out, the oolite in his quarry was not very good. Had fractures in it and parting, so he lost his shirt on that particular venture.
Is the grade for that railroad where that outcrop is at on the side of the house?
Yeah, that's where that little path
Okay.
goes up.
Now, this isn't the house with the name on it, though. There you,
Okay. So there's a little bit of confusion. The house we were just looking at
Yeah.
is over here.
Literally, you could throw a baseball.
There's a parish line between the two. So they had, and the way the land records was kept was based on the parish that the property was in. So if you, here at this lovely cottage, again, we're standing in where the canal was. And this is, I'm sorry, that's the Tucking Mill house. This is Tucking Mill Cottage. See, I'm getting confused too. And they, in honor of William Smith, decided to, put this plaque up here. And if you zoom in on it, it says, "Here lived William Smith, born and died and so on." And then this was, this plaque was put there in his honor in 1932, 100 years after he received his Wollaston Medal. And as it turns out, this is the wrong house.
He never lived here at all.
No. He lived in this somewhat uglier house in the other parish. So the parish records confirm that this is the home that William Smith had.
Love that.
This looks so nice.
Yeah,
It does. Well, and you're walking on the canal grade right here where this picture is taking. We'll
Yeah.
walk right past this house.
Just seems like that should be the one.
Yeah, it's the windows,
Let's
the
just say it
archways.
is. Okay.
Yeah.
So here's what the canal eventually looked like. This is a vintage photo, obviously.
Why haven't they fixed it, if they know?
The canal, the house, I don't know. I don't know. Keep a stiff upper lip and don't worry, I guess.
Mind the gap.
So here you can see the canal with a little walkway over it and some lovely stone buildings up on the hill above it. This is near Moncton Combe towards the east end of things. This is now, of course, all covered over. Here's the canal in its heyday going through the town of Dunkerton. And this is all that's left of it on the very far eastern end where it joins the Kennet Avon. So you can see at least what it looked like towards the terminus, and then you can see a canal boat there. These folks love themselves some canal boats. Okay. So while he was digging the canal, in the east end, saw a lot of rocks, and this is the rock that was above the angular unconformity there in the coal measures that he would see and descend down through. Have you ever seen rocks like that before in Utah?
Mike hasn't.
Yeah, I mean, think of almost any Triassic, the Chinle or the Moenkopi. This is Triassic. So these are Triassic red beds. Above that, in the Jurassic, is the blue lias, so named because of its color. These are marine beds, and these are loaded with fossils. We'll come back to the blue lias when we talk about Mary Anning, and when we'll look at this very outcrop when we get to Lyme Regis. And then above that were the outcrops of the Jurassic oolite. And it has lots of fossils in it, thin section, some beautiful ooids, oolite. This is the stone from which much of the city of Bath is built. So it's just an absolutely beautiful building stone.
Everybody's walking around Bath with their hand lens, looking at the oolites.
Yeah,
Is that Mike?
chipping off the
Pieces of the cathedral.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna carry a bunch of acids.
Yeah. Just make sure it's in your check bag.
So William Smith earned a lot of knowledge in a period of 5 or 6 years, just by looking at the rocks, interacting with them, going down underground, digging canals above ground. And this is a hill called Dundry Hill, and on top of it is the Dundry Cathedral. And the rocks here are dipping gently back to the east. And he was having a discussion with Benjamin Richardson and with Richard Townsend, these other amateur fossil collectors. And he said, I can tell you what fossils, I've never been there, but I can tell you what fossils you will find on top of Dundry Hill. And they said, well, we don't believe you. So knowing that knowing what strata should project up and be the hogback capping that hill, and knowing what fossils were in that from his experience elsewhere, he said, you'll find X, Y, and Z. So those two got in a carriage, went up the hill, up to the top of Dundry Hill. Here you can see the cathedral. And sure enough, on the outcrops that they found, and the things weathering out, they found the exact fossils that William Smith told them they would find. And they were just absolutely amazed. And they said, that is amazing. You have got to do something with that. That is knowledge that has got to be written down, and it's got to be shared. So on December 11th, on a cold day in early December in 1799, they met for dinner at the apartment or the home of Reverend Richardson. So this is Great Pulteney Street.
And that's all oolite.
Yeah, all oolite. And here at number 29, Great Pulteney, on that fateful evening, they had dinner. And after the dinner, they cleared the table, turned on the lanterns, and William Smith dictated the succession of his table of strata. They drew columns and put on their rock type and weathering type and all these other fossils. And they started at the bottom. He said the bottom one is this, the next one's this, next one's this, the clunch clay, the oak tree clay, the inferior oolite, superior oolite, the chalk. And he went through and they carefully wrote that down. They made 3 copies of it and finished by about midnight. And each of them had a copy. And they decided, mutual agreement, that they could share that with whoever they wanted to and make that common knowledge. So here is, now this is a 1816 colored version,
And what year was it that he did?
1799.
Okay, so-
And so here, you can't read them, but the coral rag, oak tree clay, the Portland stone, the marl stone, the underoolite, the fuller's earth, forest marble. So all these kind of interesting names, but
And did
so
he make up the names, or were they?
yeah, he did.
local use?
No, he just made them up.
Okay.
So here are all these names. This is the first detailed stratigraphic column. This is the first lithostratigraphy that we know of being practiced, where you actually define it by a rock type and then name it. And what he did is kind of cool on this particular column. He took soil from the outcrop and got water and got it wet and then painted over the area so it had just the same color as it did in the field. So that was pretty clever. And then he did the same thing. So when he drew the pictures of the fossils that he found in the Fuller's Earth, he had them on a background so if you took this in the field, you would see these fossils against a matrix that looked the same, which is pretty cool. So here are the fossils that are unique to the Fuller's Earth. Here are rocks or fossils that are unique to the upper oolite just above it. This is the inferior oolite that he lost money on. But here are sketches of some of the fossils and the names down here.
So they reprinted these sketches someplace in the book.
I don't know. I think you can print it off the internet. But this is from a book in 1816. This was the year after his map came out. He finally got around to putting it all down in color. Because people had been taking sort of plagiarized. Well, I guess if it's out there and he hasn't published it, then maybe people can use it and so on. So here are specimens from the coral rag. You can see 3 varieties of coral rag, and pisolite. When we went to the British Museum of History, not the Natural History Museum, there's a display, and here's William Smith's specimen that's on display there from the coral rag. So we're out of time. So let me just finish with this quick story. I was over there in England one time, and ahead of time, I wanted to go look at his fossils. because now they're just in drawers, you know, shoved away, and they're, you know, who knows where they are. I wanted to go and photograph them for posterity, maybe publish a book that, you know, here are the actual
How
specimens.
dare you?
They wouldn't let, nah, we don't have anybody that can take you back there. Nah, we're not interested. So anyway,
You should have went with Brooks.
yeah, maybe we'll have to try that,
Well,
to see if connections.
Well, no, Brooks was over there a couple of years ago, and he was in the back, and they were showing him some of the pterosaurs that Mary Anning found.
Yeah, there you go.
And he was left by himself, which is a mistake.
Yeah.
And so he got out like a little metal point, and he started doing some prep work on some of Mary Anning's pterodactyls, and.
Well, at least they didn't use dynamite this time. So,
Totally
okay,
sounds
so
like Brooks.
we're out of time. I guess I'm getting long-winded in my old age, but we'll continue. So we've gotten through fossil succession. Next time we'll talk about the map and some of the things that went on in his life later,
The bad
and
stuff.
start on whatever's next as well.
I think I read that they took that Strat column and sold it, and
Oh.
apparently made it over to the Americas,
Yeah,
to the British Bahamas or something.
yeah,
Reported copies.
yeah. We'll talk about some of the shenanigans, yeah.
There were a lot of
next
people
time.
making money off the stuff that he did, but him.
Yeah. So, okay,
So-
next time the map.
So is Bath mostly made out of the upper oolite?
I think there are some good quarries in the under.
In the inferior?
Yeah, I like the way.
Just not at where William was at.
Right. I like what Simon Winchester says, that the inferior oolite in this case was quite,
Inferior?
yeah, quite truly inferior.
But it was just luck of the draw that it was highly fractured where he was at.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Okay, so we